Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. I'm here as always, my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, it's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's Unai Emery's first official day in the job. The work permit didn't go through yesterday. People were losing their minds at the lack of content, at the lack of images. But we can confirm, as the club confirmed, Unai was at Bodymore yesterday. Didn't lead any training sessions, but he was present. First day on the job today, mate. I was so excited to see that video of him getting out of the car and he's ready to go. He's got his brand new coat on. He's ready for a new school term. It's positive vibes all round, mate, isn't it?
Yes, mate. Yes, it is. Nice to be here, mate. Very happy to be talking about this. It's been a minute in Villa Filler terms, hasn't it?
It has.
It's been like pretty non-stop. Yeah, over like the past month. So it feels like we've had a almost a break from this, but I feel we're back refreshed. There is that feeling of a new school term about this, mate. I'm bringing a newfound sense of excitement and anticipation. We're looking to we haven't actually properly dived into Emery, really, I feel, yet, and exactly what he's about, exactly what Villa fans can expect. So we've had a first few murmurs of some potential links to Villarreal players. Obviously, we spoke about Yeremy Pino in that transfer rumour. I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already, because we're going to see plenty more links to these Villarreal guys, and we've seen a few in recent days. So yes, it really does feel like the Unai Emery era is underway. He put a lovely graphic out on his social channels this morning.
Beautiful.
And so, yes, mate. Yes, I'm very excited.
It feels like we've almost come full circle, mate. We've had the owner that was active on Twitter. Now we've got the manager who's active on Twitter.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. I can't lie. I do kind of like it. Speaking of coaching staff and Twitter, tenuous link, I know, but I think we'd be begrudged not to mention it, mate. Neil Cutler has left the club. Obviously, this is something that happened over the past few days. Personally, very, very gutted about this. I think, like, I'm not losing my mind over it, because I completely understand the reasoning why. You know, Unai understandably wants to bring in his own man, and the reports are all saying that it's looking like he's bringing as many as 8 of his coaching team, who he has generally taken with him everywhere he goes. It's more of like a personal level rather than like a professional. Although I do genuinely think Cuts is probably one of, if not the best goalkeeping coach in the UK right now. I think it's, when you look at the likes of, not even like Emmy's game has come on leaps and bounds, but he made Nyland look like a very good keeper. Like, and I say that with a straight face. And long-time listeners of the Villa Filler, the real ones will know how much Dan has fucking stuck up for Oyan over the years. Dan really it's the goalkeepers society, but Dan loved Nyland, absolutely loved Nyland, and was totally vindicated when he played such an instrumental part in us reaching the League Cup final. And, you know, even at times in the restart as well, I think he played a fair few games when we came back after COVID. Nyland, like, the difference was night and day before Big Cuts came in. And we all know he had a somewhat shaky Villa career, Oyan, for one reason or another. But, you know, I get like, Neil was one of them people. I think the reason why myself and you and everybody else is upset about this is because, more importantly, mate, Neil was just a good guy to have around the club.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. No, he was fantastic, wasn't he? And look what he did with Jed too. I think Jed is arguably his biggest success story in how he became like a really trusted figure. And it felt like whenever we'd have Jed Steer going in for those cup games and stuff like that, nobody was worried about that. Everyone was totally confident about that. Obviously, Jed had his crowning moment at the Hawthorns in that playoff semi-final. And obviously, I mean, the amount of goalkeepers that have worked under because his stewardship is all there to see. And I mean, look, it's one of those where Oyan Island is now playing for RB Leipzig. And I don't think they're too bad at scouting, personally. That's just a hunch. And so, yeah, mate, yeah, no, very sad to see him go. But yeah, you've got to take these sort of things on the chin. I was interested to see that Austin McPhee stayed. That I found interesting. That's 3 managers now that have opted to stick with him, and so we have to trust that he's doing something right at the club, even if we haven't had too much evidence of it in recent years. But no, I think, looking at it positively, I think it would be nice for Emi to have a Spanish-speaking goalkeeper coach. We've seen the importance of that at Villa. I mean, you remember when Pierluigi Gallini came in, like he demanded that we had an Italian-speaking goalkeeper coach, and like whilst it's one of those where you're sad to see Neil go. Obviously, that's hugely important, and that relationship between goalie coach and the keeper themselves is massive. And so, for Emi to have another Spanish-speaking voice around the club, around the place, will be really nice. So, yeah, spinning this up. Obviously, we're very sad to see Neil go, but I'm sure he won't have a problem finding another good job, and he'll go on to be a massive success wherever.
Absolutely, I really hope Neil lands on his feet. I'm absolutely positive he will. There's going to be a whole list of clubs who are after him. And Neil, if you've somehow stumbled upon this podcast, come on the Villa Filler. This is an open invitation. We'd love to have you, Neil.
Yes, absolutely.
We would love to discuss your time at Villa. Maybe it's too soon now. Maybe you want to take some time, Neil. That's fine with us. But always welcome on the Villa Filler. And Austin McPhee, mate, someone who I wanted to mention before we spoke about the sort of transfer rumour target of this episode. I find it interesting. I totally get. I totally get the anguish and the frustration directed to this man. Whilst I do feel it is somewhat unwarranted at times, I feel like no coach in the history of professional football has received as much abuse as Austin McPhee has. And I've got to give a shout out to Dan Bardell, because I think he hit the nail on the head with his tweet. We was all saying for years, when John Terry was our defensive coach, us included, mate, the defence is awful. What on earth is John Terry doing? And then the moment he left and the defence then got bad again, it was, John Terry's gone. No wonder the defence is bad. And I guess, like, you and I and anyone else who's listening and watching this podcast, mate, will genuinely never know what Austin McPhee does or how highly he is rated. But I think the fact he is outlived, he's on his 3rd manager now. He's clearly he's a cat. He's got 9 lives, but there must be something in his methods, right? And I think as well, when you look at it feels so Wes Edens. It feels so Milwaukee Bucks. It feels so NBA in that, like we spoke about it before with Danks and his role with the Golden State Warriors and stuff like that, mate. But like the teams of scouts and analysts and people who dissect all the different like plays and stuff like that in basketball is so extensive. So it does almost feel like this is probably something that was out of maybe Smith's hands, was out of Gerrard's hands, and definitely out of Emery's hands. It does fit like his role. There was a lot of you had your Danny Murphys of the world losing their mind over Villa appointing a set piece coach. It felt very like an Americanism. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Clubs have set piece coaches. It's not a new thing. It's just we hired one who looks like we've just plucked him off the streets and is just some random. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not uncommon, but it does feel like an Americanism that has sort of made its way into the game. That I wouldn't be surprised if this is at the request of someone like an Edens at the club.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, mate. I mean, you obviously got to bear in mind that he's also not just the set piece coach, but he's the assistant manager of the Scottish national team as well. So, his coaching pedigree is there to see. And look, like, obviously, I think because he coaches such a specific area, that is always going to be polarized. And naturally, we sort of expect to see, and it's always felt like a very high profile appointment. Like, his name was well known to all of the fans, everybody at the club, in a way that probably wasn't with any of the other coaches. I don't know why that is, considering his area of expertise is so niche, but like Aaron Danks Obviously, everybody knows him now, considering he's taken charge of the club for the last 2 games. But he was nowhere near as well known as someone like Austin McPhee. And he was someone that has also been around since the days of Dean Smith. He's actually been at the club longer than Austin McPhee. And I just think it's because he is so well known and he coaches such a specific area that every time a corner kick is swung in, or we have one of those useless short ones that like we end up passing around and then, so all of a sudden we're being counter-attacked. It's like his name is automatically associated with those. And yeah, it's revisionism is an amazing thing. And as you said with John Terry, I think it's been the same with Michael Beale. The amount of conversations I've had to have with people where they're like, oh, well, Michael Beale left and it all went downhill for you guys. And I was like, I have to not correct people, but be like, yeah, but like we weren't exactly 09 Barcelona when Beale was here. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, 100%.
It's always like as soon as someone falls out of the system, then all like that vacancy that they leave is automatically the problem. And yeah, it would be interesting to see what Villa would look like without McPhee. But yeah, it's one of those where I think we have to respect his abilities and the fact that 3 managers have decided to stick with him ultimately. And for someone with the pedigree of Unai Emery, who's going to have a very clear idea of exactly who he wants in his backroom staff and has managed clubs all over Europe, has worked with so many different coaches, for him to pick him out and be like, yeah, that guy can stay. Says a lot.
It does, mate. It does. I just thought it'd be important to mention that. And obviously Danks is another one at the moment. It seems like he's been offered a different role in the club, which would take him away from the first team setup. I don't know what that means, but again, he seems like somebody who is good to have around. But I think what's important, and whilst, the departure of Cuts has, I don't want to say upset me because I'm not losing sleep over it, but is something that I can see why why Emery would want to do it, but ultimately, I do feel like we've lost a good coach. We have to trust Emery at the end of the day. If you're giving this guy £4.5 million per year, 4.5-year contract, longest contract in Aston Villa history, you've got to give the guy what he wants. You've got to give him everything he wants. You have to give him that platform to completely reinvent the club. And I'm in no means suggesting that McPhee, that Danks, that even Cuts are responsible for the mediocrity that's been stinking out our football club for the longest time now, mate. But something has to change from top to bottom. And if it's not going to be Purslow or Lang or the owners, and I'm not suggesting it should be the owners, then it's got to be the staff. And if that's and you've got to look at the players as well, realistically. So it's a welcome change. And as you alluded to earlier, Matt, having more Spanish speakers, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we now have the opportunity, and I think we were doing it in any case with the likes of Phil, Dougie. Obviously, they speak Portuguese, but they've all had time in Spain and can speak Spanish. We're almost creating a little culture at the club, right? We've got a nice little Hispanic cohort, which is always going to be nice when you're attracting players. We've got Brazilian internationals, Argentinian internationals. Wouldn't be surprised to see some Spanish players come through the door, which, by God, mate, with Carles Hill being the best Spanish player to ever play for Villa, boy, am I welcoming some better talent than that. But it's an opportunity to start fresh, and it's something that I would 100% welcome. And mate, if it brings more tapas bars to Birmingham, then that's just an added bonus, right? That is just that it gets even better. We're talking about Wolves are like this close to putting Lopetegui as well, which I think is something we mentioned a few weeks ago before it was even like a link, right? Something that you mentioned, mate. So interesting little Spanish thing happening in the Midlands.
And of course, you've got Carlos Corberán at West Brom as well now. So
of course,
maybe if those 3 little Spanish managers can get together and find those tapas bars in Birmingham, have a nice little trio going out on the town together. Just quickly, mate, I did some digging because it was the longest contract ever handed to a manager. But I was looking into what's the longest tenure a manager's ever held at Aston Villa, and I had to go all the way back to almost when we were founded. George Ramsey held the Villa manager's job. Get this, from 1884 until 1926. What is that?
Wow.
That's 42 years.
That's a
Is that?
gaffer right
Is my
there.
maths right? That's crazy. So I
That's
think Unai will have
mad.
to, Unai will have to do quite a lot, I think, to outlast. I think that's going to stand the test of time. George Ramsay's legacy at Aston Villa. So yeah, whilst he's got the biggest contract, he's got some way to outstay the longest ever serving manager of Aston Villa. But here's hoping,
Mate, that's the thing. Like, the problem is with like modern football is like it's so short sighted, and there are so many people who were wrongfully saying give Gerrard time, and I understand why. I understand why people would say that. I understand why the Danny Murphys and the Graham Souness's of the world would say give my mate Stephen more time. Generally, like obviously removing Gerrard from that conversation, I do believe that if you're going to appoint someone, unless things are going so far south it's unreal and you've got to pull the plug, I think I do generally believe that if you give people time and you give people the opportunity to improve upon the form and the results, it's going to be so much more beneficial long term. And I think you look at like Klopp's been at Liverpool for 7 years now. I know it's like the whole 7-year curse thing for Klopp and things aren't obviously going fantastically, but I think Jurgen Klopp certainly outlasts the owners at Liverpool. Do you know what I mean? Like the fans would turn quicker on the owners than Klopp.
yes.
Guardiola coming into his 6th year in management now at Manchester City. Eric Ten Hag, he's going to be another one where if they sack him within 3 years, then they are absolutely out of their mind. He's somebody who should be the Manchester United manager for at the very least the next 10 years. And there's something to be said for people who can be a short-term fix. You look at a Conte, and he doesn't spend any longer than 3 years at any given club because it's just not viable with his methods. But the only way of breeding success is for to have a long-term vision, and surely a part of a not even a 5-year plan, but a 10-year plan. You're not going to factor in, we're going to make 7 managerial changes in this time. So hopefully Unai's here for the long haul. He's a coach with so much pedigree and genuinely so excited, mate. But I think it's time to talk about Nicolas Jackson because everybody has been speaking about him already. We're a bit late to the party, but nevertheless, we love to. It's the transfer rumour mills. It's our bread and butter here at the Villa, mate. It'd be rude not to talk about this guy. Again, Dan, I'm putting pressure on you here, but I know you're going to know a lot more about this guy than I am, being the avid La Liga fan. I don't know anybody who watches La Liga as much as Dan. A lot of people, when they talk about transfers and when they, you get people who pretend to know. And like to a certain extent, I'm not going to say we pretend, but like if there's a player we don't know, we'll be very honest with you. But nevertheless, our research is unfaltered, I feel, if I do say so myself. We do go so in depth, and that's why you guys love the transfer rumour mills. There's not a lot on this guy, Dan, because he's fairly new, he's fairly fresh. But with that being said, mate, and really not necessarily taking a look at the stats, but looking at the story that surrounds this guy, he's somebody who it may prove somewhat difficult for Villa to get, because I've read Barcelona are linked with this guy.
Yeah, this is a really, really interesting one. I didn't see this one coming at all because he's a number 9 primarily. He sort of, he's played a little bit of attacking midfield in his time, but he is primarily a number 9. And flat out, he hasn't played very much football. He's played 21 league games for Villarreal since he started playing for them in 2021. This season, he's played 8 games, got a goal and 2 assists to go for that. So he's averaging, in those 8 games, just under a goal contribution every other match, which is about par for the course. It should be referenced that he doesn't play due to, he's quite a young player, doesn't get full 90s very often. In fact, he hasn't played one this season. He's only played 83 and 82 minutes twice. And aside from that, the longest he's played in a match is 65 minutes. He's 21 years old, and he came through the Villarreal system, played for their B team before making his first team debut on the 3rd of October. He replaced Arnaud Danjuma in a 2-0 win over Betis. Scored his first goal in the top tier in August of the following year. And then this season is the first year he's been promoted primarily to the first team. Him and Alex Baena came through and they're officially fully fledged members of the first team now at Villarreal. He's generated quite a bit of interest, as you say. Apparently Barcelona have been looking at him. Everton and Newcastle have seen names touted as well. He's not exactly a household name, and it's for that reason that I'm surprised we've been linked with him. It's one that I don't think is going to excite too many people, but he is a promising young prospect and is regarded quite highly in Spain. Gets a lot of minutes, mainly in sort of obviously Villarreal in the Europa Conference League, plays a lot of football in that, and then in their Copa del Rey games as well. And so, yes, it's one of those where he's quite an athletic forward. He's got good technical ability. He's still quite young in the way that he plays, in that physically he hasn't properly fleshed out that, and he doesn't have that necessary sort of nous, and that's why I think the Premier League might come a little bit too early for him at the moment. But it's an interesting link, and it's really hard to tell what's fact and fiction in terms of who Unai would want to bring from Villarreal. And so, yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't think Villa fans would be too on it, maybe rightly so. It'd be interesting to see what kind of fee would be touted about. But interesting to see that it's all wide men, it's all number 9s early doors that we've been linked with. There hasn't been any of your Pau Torreses or anything like that. It's all been attacking players, which is where obviously we've seen a lot of weaknesses in the squad, mate.
Absolutely. And something interesting that I pointed out after having a dive in FBref. Obviously, you guys know we swear by FBref on this podcast. FBref just sponsor us. Like, we love your website.
Yes.
But so basically, what FBref do, for you guys who aren't aware, they curate all the stats, which is fantastic, and then they give you a per 90 stat that is averaged over the previous 365 days. What they also do is compare those metrics and give you 10 players who also, put up similar numbers, right? And obviously, Dan, as you mentioned, hasn't played many full 90s. So I'm not going to sit here and list these full 90 stats because they're not very impressive. And I'm not going to convince anybody that this guy should join Aston Villa by looking at the statistics. But interestingly, and I don't know if this is a glowing endorsement of our Ollie Watkins, but he is the third most similar player, according to FBref, when you compare the numbers. So it's very interesting, mate. Players like Rafael Bohr, top of the list, Michael Antonio, Brill and Bolo, another one who's at Monaco now, even Patson Daka and Odsonne Edouard. I'm looking at this list of forwards, right, mate? And obviously, I'm going to say I haven't seen this guy play. But when you compare him to these guys, I'm seeing a striker that doesn't score goals. I think that's fair to say. But again, to caveat it, he's not played a lot of. He hasn't played a lot of football minutes wise. But it's not a glowing endorsement, is it?
No, as I said, mate, it is surprising. And look, it's quite a prosperous youth academy in at Villarreal. Just touching on it quickly, I was looking through products of Villarreal's academy in recent years, and our very own Hannah Hampton came through at Villarreal, which I didn't realise.
Really?
Yeah. And obviously, just shout out quickly to Hannah. Obviously, she's clearly got a lot of stuff going on. And we hope you're okay, Hannah. Whatever's going on, hope it clears itself soon. You can get back to playing it for England, etc., etc. But yes, most importantly. Yeah. And so, Jackson is an interesting one. I wouldn't get too hot on it. I don't see too much in this. He does play senior football. He's been called up to the senior Senegal squad. Hasn't played for them yet, but he's represented them at under 20 level and stuff like that. So he's widely regarded, but he's a product still in his infancy. But it's one thing I would say is that he's got the numbers of a 19-year-old at 21. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy to say, but 21 is players, the big guys, and if they come through before that now, he seems to have been emerging a little bit late on the scene, and that's not writing him off completely. But let's see what happens this season, maybe at Villarreal. Let's see how if he does manage to. He plays a lot, like he's in the squad a lot. He does play in a lot of games, but as you said, mate, it's the lack of minutes that aren't exactly encouraging. So we'll see.
But he's a player whose contract is up in the end of the season, mate. Transfermarkt has him valued at around £9 million. Barcelona's obviously an extremely attractive offer proposition for whoever you are, regardless of whether they can pay you or not. I think most people would still go and sign for Barcelona. And I doubt they would have to activate another financial lever to get this one done. But mate, I thought I'd throw another player at you, right? This isn't a player that's linked whatsoever, but it was an interesting weekend of Premier League football, mate. I don't know about you. Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, 5-0. Fantastic, right? The story to come out of that, mate, for me, the thing that stood out is a certain player who scored twice and assisted once in a spell of 8 minutes. Do you know who I'm talking about, mate?
Reiss Nelson.
Reiss Nelson, another player whose contract is up in the summer, a player who was handed his Arsenal debut at 17 under our current manager. Now, things haven't gone as Reiss Nelson would have hoped or predicted at Arsenal for whatever reason. He's had loans to Hoffenheim, he's had loans to Feyenoord, and he seemingly came out of the middle of nowhere and scored 2 goals against Nottingham Forest. And when he scored, I was thinking, I was kind of checking the scores. I was on shift that day. That game wasn't on telly, unfortunately. But I was sort of, I've got live score up and I see a Nelson has scored, and I'm thinking, is this like a Portuguese left back? Is this like I was getting confused with Nuno Tavares, who again I don't even think he's even at the club at the moment. But I was like, who's Nelson? And I click on it, and it's Reiss Nelson. Now, I'm in no means saying we should go and sign an out of form English 22-year-old winger who has been plying his trade in the Eredivisie, but we've got a history with signing players from Arsenal. You look at Callum Chambers, you look at Emi Martinez. Somebody who's going to be relatively inexpensive is a natural winger, which I think is something that we severely lack as well. Transfer marked have him currently at about 5.5 million in value. Obviously, his contract is up in the summer. He'll be looking to play regular football somewhere. I think it's fair to say with the likes of Saka, Smith Rowe, Martinelli, Odegaard, Vieira, despite scoring 2 against Nottingham Forest, he definitely isn't in favour at Arsenal. I wonder if there's anything in this. Again, this is just pure speculation from my end.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, mate. It's still crazy to think he's only 22. And that when we talk about Nicolas Jackson, he's only a year older, and you look at the amount of football that Reiss Nelson has played comparatively. And so, it's interesting. I thought he would be more involved this season than he is, because he didn't actually have a bad pre-season. He actually scored for Arsenal in pre-season on their US tour and stuff like that. And he played a fair bit of football for them. He played in that 5-3 win over Nuremberg, where I think Gabriel Jesus got a hat-trick in like 14 minutes and everybody was going crazy. Yeah, he played in that game. And scored a couple of games later, and I thought he would be involved more than he is. And that loan to Hoffenheim was actually quite productive. I didn't realize perhaps how good it was. And I was looking back on it the other day, and he got 7 goals in his time in just 5 starts. He played 18 games in total, but just 5 of them were starts, which is pretty impressive, really, for that, like just a one-off loan to a brand new league. He set a real impression there. And then obviously he didn't quite work out for him at Feyenoord for whatever reason. Scored 2 goals at Feyenoord, both of them were in Europe. But yeah, that loan to Hoffenheim, 23 games in all comps, 7 goals, not bad for he must have been a teenager. So the talent is clearly there. He's won the FA Cup, he's won the Community Shield twice. Obviously last season he was a Conference League runner-up with Feyenoord as well, because obviously they got all the way to the final and played Roma, and so the pedigree's there. I thought he'd be involved more than he is. It'd be interesting to see whether that sort of kicks on some form at Arsenal. But this trend of linking Unai to recent players and to players of his past certainly won't run out. But hopefully maybe a few of them can come from PSG. let's start the rumours from that side of things. But I think that trend will definitely continue, mate.
Fancy coming over, Neymar. Fancy living in Sutton Coldfield. I'm sure he'd love it. I just thought I'd throw that out there. If we start seeing any links, then I will absolutely hope that the Villa filler gets credit for that. But it's an interesting one, mate. It's an interesting one. Obviously, I think as well, his time at Hoffenheim he'd have been under the tutelage of Julian Nagelsmann as well, the current Bayern Munich manager, who is like he's actually taken a lot of stick off the Bayern fans. They've had a bit of a rough time. I mean, they've won all the Champions League games, but Bundesliga form is somewhat to be left desired, I think, with the Bayern Munich fans. But transfer rumor, guys. Let us know your thoughts on Jackson. I can't. If there's any Spanish fans, any Villarreal fans in the comments, let us know. Let us know your thoughts on this guy. How you feeling about this move? And if you guys aren't aware, we have a fantasy league. Bet you weren't expecting to say that. You guys thought I was just going to shamelessly promote the TikTok and Instagram. I'll do that later. Don't you worry. Thought we'd give a shout out to guy who's top of the league right now, Twanda Muzenda. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, mate. You're top of the Villa Filler League. Looking at your team right now, very solid. Didn't have the best haul last week, albeit, but I think it was one of them ones. Kane blanked. Haaland wasn't in the squad. But you can see he backs Newcastle players in our game, and he's been rewarded for that. I did the exact same thing. So shout out to you. Obviously, the winner of the fantasy league at the end of the season is going to get a shirt. So if you guys aren't in the fantasy league, the link will be in the description to join. As well, while we're at it, make sure you check out the Instagram and TikTok at VillaFillerPod on Instagram and at Heart of the Heart on TikTok. Clips of this podcast are going to make it there, so you can enjoy us wherever you're at, whichever social platform you prefer. We're also uploading these as YouTube Shorts. There's been a really warm reception to that, so shout out to everybody who's been engaging with the YouTube Shorts. Shout out to the Newcastle fans in the comments as well, man. Boosting the views exactly as I predicted, mate. Exactly as it happens every single year. You can always rely on the tune to give you a few views. There's like Newcastle, Leeds, Arsenal, and Man City as well, actually, surprisingly, are all generally very generous when watching other fan channels. So shout out to them. We'll be back in a few days' time to preview the Manchester United game. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on the tactics in and around that as well. Maybe that's a separate video. But yeah, if you guys want to see that, let us know by hitting a like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribing for more. Up the Villa.